We're going to do something a bit different today and talk about the PFL, otherwise known as the Professional Fighters League. When I started this channel, I specifically called it Bullet Point MMA, not Bullet Point UFC, because I want to cover other promotions, particularly the PFL. And I think this is a necessary video because July 2026 is the most important month for the PFL in their history. And why is it important? First and foremost, they have three huge shows with title fights taking place in the US, and this is a really important opportunity for them to engage new fans. Now, even though the PFL is a US based promotion, they haven't been as successful in selling tickets and engaging fans in the US compared to when they run shows in Europe. So for them, engaging the national market is actually as crucial as engaging the international market. But also, this relates to a potential new broadcasting deal. Now, ESPN are losing their rights to show the PFL at the end of the year. Those exclusive rights will come to an end when the contract runs out. And as I understand, it's very unlikely that that contract gets renewed because PFL CEO John Martin has publicly criticized that ESPN don't do enough to promote that they're showing the PFL. And also, they don't make the shows as accessible. I don't actually have ESPN. I'm not based in the US, so I don't actually know how challenging it can be for a local fan in the US to access the product. But I think there's sometimes a bit of confusion on what channel it's showing on, whether it's on the channel versus the app. So I think that's caused a bit of confusion and not really put this product in front of as many national fans in the US. So if PFL run three successful shows in July 2026, this potentially gives them an opportunity to engage potential new broadcasters who want to invest in this product and have exclusive rights. And even if they're currently talking to existing new broadcasters who potentially want to showcase the product, three successful shows means that they can maybe use that as bargaining power to increase the premium for what those broadcasters need to pay for the product. It's also a good opportunity for them to gain some serious income. As things currently stand, recently, it's been communicated that the PFL is still not profitable. A lot of what they do is still based on investors putting money into the promotion. Three successful shows, are not going to instantly make the PFL profitable, but I think if they can gain some serious income, that probably reassures the investors that this is a promotion with serious potential. Now, why should you care as a fan? This is the most important thing. I think first and foremost, the PFL is now easy to follow. They've removed that tournament format, which made no sense. There's less risk of getting duplicate fights. They're now booking fights based on what makes the most sense and what drives the most excitement. And this is now the real number two promotion. Certainly since the closure of Bellator, I think the PFL has had the best roster. They have solid new talents as well, like Usman Nurmagomedov, Johnny Eblin, Dakota Ditchevar. I've picked out those three because they're actually going to be on these upcoming cards, as is Fadjin, to be fair, as well. Um, but they have a very good roster, but they're now actually making it easy to understand, easy to follow since they've got rid of the tournament format. They're running it like a normal MMA promotion. So now I think they are undisputed the number two promotion. But also, the UFC needs competition for their own product. I don't think a monopoly does any favors for the consumer, including in mixed martial arts. Now, the UFC have had an interesting 2026. I would say their numbered cards have been good. They've just done the Freedom 250 card, which was a very successful card. We spoke about that in yesterday's video. Do check it out. Um, However, I think some of the fight night cards that the UFC have been pulling on have been slightly underwhelming, and therefore, if they have some serious competition or at least a little bit of a nudge, maybe the UFC could consider putting on, stronger fight night cards, and that just means that the consumer gets better product all way round. Even if you're not specifically watching the PFL, I think as an MMA fan, you should want them to do well because it will nudge the UFC to improve their game in a couple areas. And also, is there a such thing as too much MMA? I would argue no. PFL Austin takes place on July the 18th. This is the first of their three cards in July. I've got a screenshot on the screen at the moment from the arena that they're running, which is the Moody Center, and you can see the blue dots represent vacant seats. So there's still a lot of tickets for the PFL to sell. Marketing has always been one of their biggest challenges, but they've got just over a month, or essentially a month and 1 day, to really sell out this arena. Even if they don't sell it out seat for seat, you think that they should really try and sell out as many of these seats as possible, and push as hard as they can to make this a well attended event. And the card itself is fairly decent. The main event has been slightly altered, with Johnny Eblen now taking on Impa Kasanganay for the interim middleweight championship. That's a bit of a blow to this card, because the main event was going to be Costello Van Steenis defending the undisputed middleweight world championship against Johnny Eblen in a very well anticipated second fight between the two. However, he's now injured, is Van Steenis, so it's up to Kasanganay to jump in and have a chance to scrap with Eblen for that interim belt. These two have met before. Eblen beat Kasanganay in what was a close fight. Eblen, up until that point, hadn't really been challenged in his career. But Kasanganay did give him something to think about, and Eblen walked out as a very, I think it was by split decision in a 3-round fight. So there is a bit of history here. But Eblen, has a bit of a point to prove. I think after that loss to Van Steenis, that was his first loss. He has since beat Brian Battle, but I think he still, wants to prove that he is the best middleweight in this promotion. And even though this isn't for the undisputed belt, he obviously now needs to go past the test of Impa Kasanganay, who has a fairly high ceiling himself. He's won tournaments in the PFL previously. He's beaten some of the other top contenders. He recently beat Dalton Roster, who's a fairly strong contender in this middleweight division. So Kasanganay does have a fairly high ceiling, and I think given that he's come close against Eblen before, and given that Eblen now has a loss on his record and isn't seen as this invincible power that he once was, he might actually feel this is a decent chance to claim interim gold. I do think Johnny Eblen will win this one. I think he'll probably win it by unanimous decision over 5 rounds, or maybe he'll tap out Kasanganay in the 3rd or 4th round. And then you're going to get the well-anticipated fight, which was supposed to headline this card, between Eblen challenging Van Steenis for the undisputed gold. And that has such a big story behind it, because obviously Eblen was handed his first loss by Van Steenis, and that fight came against a run of play, because Eblen was comfortably winning that fight until the very dying seconds of the 5th round, when Van Steenis submitted him. So that was a really emphatic end to what was otherwise a one-sided fight, or at least close to being a one-sided fight. So there is a real story to tell when these two hopefully get to do a bout for the second time. And you can also market it as champion versus champion for the undisputed gold. There's a couple interesting featherweight fights on this card as well, but I'm really interested to see Sergio Pettis fight against Lewis McCrillen. I think Sergio Pettis is probably one of the top contenders in this bantamweight division. However, he is coming off of a loss. I think he's one of the other big names that the PFL has that they should really market, particularly for selling this fight as well. The title fight makes the most sense in terms of pushing and promoting the card, but I think when you've got Sergio Pettis in the co-main event, there's a real opportunity to add some buy-in to other fans who maybe are a bit 50-50 on whether they want to buy tickets or not. As I mentioned, this card takes place at the Moody Centre, which has a capacity of just over 16,000. The UFC ran this venue for a fight night in 2022. They drew just over 13,000. The question is, can the PFL meet somewhere near those numbers? I don't know if the PFL really has the pulling power to match that or better that, but this is the card which the UFC ran for that fight night in 2022, and I have to say it's a fairly underwhelming card. I mean, Josh Emmett versus Calvin Kattar in the main event. I think both these guys were maybe relevant in the featherweight division in 2022, but it wasn't really like a stellar fight that was that intriguing. You've got other names on there like Kevin Holland, who always draws, fair enough. I don't think Joaquin Buckley was that relevant in the welterweight division at the time. So this was a bit of an underwhelming card that still got a fairly good attendance for the UFC in this venue. Now, a key reason why the UFC drew a decent number in this venue is because, first and foremost, it's the UFC. I think irrespective of who you have on the card, the UFC will always draw decent numbers. But that's exactly why we need competition. We need the UFC to be taking these fight nights more seriously. And that's, where a bit of competition from the PFL will do some good work. And then moving on, we've got PFL Washington on July 25th. This is a couple stand-up fights which I'm interested in. Only 4 fights have been announced so far, so the card is very much still evolving. I do like the welterweight title fight for the vacant belt. Fadjin versus Shamil Musayev. Um, so a really bit of interesting backstory here. The inaugural champion was Ramazan Kuramagomedov, but he's since vacated the belt after retiring. Or actually, I think he's been stripped off the belt, is the way PFL CEO John Martin referred to it. So Muziev gets another opportunity to fight for the welterweight gold against an undefeated Fadjin. Now, Muziev himself was undefeated with the exception of that loss to Nurmagomedov. So it's a really interesting dynamic between an undefeated fighter versus someone who still has a fantastic record. And Muziev has also won tournaments in the PFL before, but is going up against someone who I think is quite different, who is very lively and energetic in Fadjin, who can strike. I'm going to pick Muziev to win this one. I think he'll probably see out the 5 rounds and win this by decision. I would say maybe split on a unanimous decision. It's a bit hard to call. Yeah, that will probably be how I see him winning this. I don't think he's necessarily going to finish Fadjin. I think Fadjin will still give him some problems and have some striking success as well. And then you'll have an undisputed welterweight champion, and this is a fairly strong division for the PFL. They have other contenders in this division who Muziev can potentially consider going forward as well. I'm really interested to see who actually wins this fight, but I am just going to pick Muziev. The other fight I'm going to call out on this card that's already been announced is the light heavyweight bout between Antonio Carlos Jr. versus Luke Traynor. Two guys who are on a really good run. Luke Traynor's gaining more respect in this sport with a fairly good record, which he's transferred over since his Bellator days. I think he's undefeated in the PFL, or if he's not undefeated, he's still got a fairly strong record. I can't quite remember. And Antonio Carlos Jr., he's fought in the UFC before. He's won a tournament in the PFL, so he comes with a high ceiling. And I think this is a title eliminator in some ways. It's not officially a title eliminator, but I have to say these are the two guys in contention to face Corey Anderson for the light heavyweight title. So I think, whoever wins this is probably going to be Corey Anderson's next opponent, I would argue. And I don't think the winner of this versus Corey Anderson is the PFL's most marketable fight, but, you still need to establish storylines. You still need to establish rivalries and characters. So I think this at least gets the ball rolling on understanding what happens next with the light heavyweight title. The venue for PFL Washington, D.C. is much smaller. It has a capacity of just over 4,000. So this isn't going to have, a massive attendance, even if they were to sell out the venue. But I think, first and foremost, there might be a good opportunity for the UFC to still sell out this venue from taking over some of the hype from Freedom 250. So the UFC have obviously just ran that historic card at the White House. Could that, increase the dialogue locally in Washington, D.C. and get more local people talking about MMA? Is there maybe a bit of an MMA buzz, which is getting people thinking, actually, after that card, I want to watch some more mixed martial arts? Is it going to make casuals think, you know what, MMA is actually quite an interesting sport. I'll be interested in watching a live event. And therefore, what's the next live event that's taking place on my doorstep? Well, it's actually not the UFC, but it is the PFL. Would they be willing to gamble at slightly better price tickets with some decent fighters? That maybe could work in the PFL's favour, perhaps. I don't know if that was part of their marketing strategy when booking this venue, but I do think timing-wise, it certainly could work in their favour. And then the final of these 3 cards takes place on July the 31st, PFL New York. Now, this card is also still evolving, but you have got some really interesting fights. You've got the lightweight champion Usman Nurmagomedov defending the belt against Archie Kogan. This is undefeated versus undefeated. And when you've got the name Nurmagomedov in this sport, I think you're taken seriously, it's fair to say. Dakota Ditcheva also fighting on this card, one of the PFL's biggest homegrown stars, taking on Denise Kielhortz. This could potentially be a really interesting fight because I think if Ditcheva wins, which many people expect, she'll then fight for the inaugural flyweight championship. And she is one of their rising stars. This card I think is interesting for a few reasons. We mentioned, undefeated versus undefeated in the main event. Usman himself is a draw though. I think when your name is Nurmagomedov, when you train with Khabib Nurmagomedov, when you train with Islam Makhachev, and when your brother is Umar Nurmagomedov, who himself has challenged for UFC Gold, I think you're going to have lots of attention. You're going to have lots of engagement on social media, and you're taking on an undefeated guy who, is going to potentially give you your biggest challenge in your career, and someone's going to lose that undefeated record. So I think this is interesting because it's a good marketable fight for the PFL. But also you've got Dakota Ditcheva. She's a homegrown star in the PFL. So she's somebody who I think adds some good value to this card. She's a name that everyone talks about, probably one of, if not the most exciting female mixed martial artists in the sport at the moment. And after, running a smaller venue in Washington, D.C., the PFL returns to a bigger venue for this show. So the UFC ran the venue for this show, which is the UBS Arena, in 2022. They drew over 16,000 for a fight night. That was, to be fair, headlined by Ortega versus Rodriguez, which I think is a fairly good fight at featherweight, so I understand why that would have got decent numbers. But this is a strong card as well. I know the PFL brand isn't as strong as the UFC, but this is still a decent card, and I think for the reasons on screen, there's a good opportunity for the PFL to think optimistic about selling out some tickets for this card. Are they going to get 16,000? Not necessarily, but I think they'll still be targeting a good turnout. You can currently see that there's still a few more tickets for them to move, but they've still got a month and a half, so they've got a bit more time for this card. And I think with Nurmagomedov on the card, with Ditcheva on the card, with a title fight, they should really be thinking about how do we promote this as wide as possible. The biggest challenge for them, as we mentioned, is promoting their cards. If they can promote this one right, if they can really engage people, I think when you're, running a card in the New York metropolitan area, a region which doesn't always get a lot of mixed martial arts cards. I think the UFC go to New York maybe once every year, if that. This is potentially a really good opportunity for the PFL to capitalize. And I'm interested to see how many of these tickets that they can sell for what is going to be a really big card for them. The only downside about this card is it could be the last time we see Nurmagomedov fight for the PFL because his contract is coming to an end. And there are rumors that he potentially goes to the UFC, although those rumors are not concrete. But it is a known fact that this is his last fight on his contract. So you're potentially creating a star, or they have created a star, but you're potentially giving this star his final hurrah before going to the UFC. I think either way, you need to book him strong. He is your champion. You want him to go out and prove that this is actually a good product. And regardless of what he does after that, you just have to kind of play it by ear. Use your position to negotiate as strongly as you can. He does seem happy in the PFL, but I think the pull of the UFC might also twist his ear, especially when he's got connections and relatives fighting in that promotion. So yeah, this is a really interesting card, but that's a bit of a downside. It might be the last time we see one of their biggest stars fight in the promotion. But July 2026, a huge year for the PFL, a huge month for the PFL, and what is also a huge year for the PFL. What fight are you most excited about? Let me know in the comments. Until next time.